people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. Another set of eyes on Alicia Baumgardner's effort to clear her name, her hair follicle test, and what it all could mean.
By way of Ryan O'Hara at New York Fights.
In an effort to clear her name after a dirty drug test, unified super featherweight champion Alicia Baumgardner submitted to hair follicle testing on October 18th to the Cardiff-based Kensford Laboratories Limited. Testing came back negative for 17 banned substances, including the banned performance-enhancing drug Masterolone, which she tested positive for by way of drug-free sport. The report also states that the DHEA was detected, but was within the range of naturally occurring physiological levels of DHEA in hair for females. DHEA is a hormone produced by the body's adrenal glands. The body uses the substance to make androgens and estrogens, the male and female sex hormones. On examination by experts interviewed by New York Fights, it appears the Alicia Baumgardner hair testing methods are not quite the slam dunk offering of proof which the fighter implied with the promise of big news on November 20th, as seen on her Instagram page.
And that's what I figured. I figured that she wasn't out of the woods yet.
Baumgardner tested positive for Masterolone, also known as Proviron, and Masterolone acetate, also known as Primobolan, in a pre-fight drug test conducted by Drug Free Sport prior to her July 15th unanimous decision win over Christina Lenardatu. According to a lab report obtained by New York Fights, hair samples were collected from Alicia Baumgardner on October 18th and tested at Kensford Laboratories Limited, a non-WADA accredited lab in Cardiff, Wales, on October 24th. You get the sense that them not being accredited by WADA, that could be a problem.
How would a sanctioning body's gonna feel about that? That you conducted your hair follicle test by a non-WADA accredited lab?
Tests were completed on October 26. Methanolone acetate does not appear on the list of tested substances. Alicia Baumgardner did test negative for methanolone, but the lab failed to indicate which form of methanolone was tested. Methanolone acetate is an oral antibiotic steroid. Another form, methanolone enanthate, is injected into the muscle. According to the report, testosterone...
Who names this stuff? Why do they put so many consonants in these words?
According to the report, testosterone cypionate, a well-known form of injectable testosterone, could not be reported for this sample. No explanation for the omission was provided in the document. Kensford Laboratories Limited declined to comment early Thursday morning.
Now, I don't presume to be an expert of any kind on these matters, though I feel that Kensford Laboratories' hair follicle test may not be admissible to the powers that be on the predication that they are not a WADA-accredited lab, like VADA's.
The labs that VADA uses. VADA and WADA are separate anti-doping entities. They are, but VADA more or less adheres to the same banned list with a few nuances and more or less the same provisions that WADA does.
The commissions here stateside seem to adhere to WADA, whereas the sanctioning bodies, they seem to work in tandem with VADA.
This hair follicle test having been conducted by a separate entity, so to speak, this Kensford Laboratories Limited.
Them not being a WADA-accredited lab could affect whether or not the powers that be even accept their findings,
which they are said to still be reviewing, according to the report. The lab tested 2 to 3 centimeters of Baumgardner's hair in the first sample and 3 to 4 centimeters of her hair in the second sample. Per Atkinson Lewis, a company that conducts drug and alcohol testing for the UK family courts, hair grows at an average rate of 1 centimeter per month. The number can vary from 0.7 centimeters to 1.5 centimeters per month, depending on the individual. A 6-centimeter long section, head of hair, can provide a 6-month drug use profile, according to the report. The first sample provided a testing period from July 13th, the day after Alicia Baumgardner tested positive, to August 12th, while the second and third editions ranged from June 13th to July 13th.
We all know that Alicia Baumgardner has a gorgeous mane of hair, more than enough to come up with a 6-month drug profile.
Putting together this story, Ryan O'Hara consulted anti-doping expert Victor Conti, who stated the longer the piece of hair, the longer back in time is the data. My basic understanding is that each centimeter of hair growth is about 1 month. However, other body hair, like pubic hair, grows much slower. Hair testing can be unreliable sometimes for testing anabolic steroids and other anabolic agents like clenbuterol. Dark hair also has an affinity for certain substances like clenbuterol, and light hair would show less, like in the case of Canelo Alvarez. Hair is considered a confirmatory sample and not a screening sample. If urine is positive and hair is negative, that is an issue. Hair does not detect recent exposure within the last 2 weeks or more.
The saving grace for Alicia is that it's been a lot longer than 2 weeks since she tested positive.
Hair does not detect recent exposure within the last 2 weeks or more, and if it were only a brief contamination type of exposure, then hair would not detect it. Anabolic steroids are a qualitative test and not a quantitative test. So she is either pregnant or not. There is no quantitative allowable limit. So she is basically positive for primobolan, in my opinion. Alicia is basically positive for at least primobolan and will likely be suspended.
Initial reports from when the story first broke indicated that Alicia tested positive for not just one banned substance, but 2. And when it comes to primobolan, it's not quantitative, it's qualitative.
It's not like what you see with clenbuterol, where there's a certain threshold. When it comes to primobolan, no amount is supposed to be there because it's a black market drug. It's not even allowed in this country. So where else would you have found it other than the black market?
Alicia, in her own public statement, stated that she tested negative for masterolone, but what about this whole primobolan thing? Where are we with that?
There's no mention of it in her PSA, but Victor Conti brought it up, so at minimum you get the sense that in spite of what she said, she's not out of the woods yet, and she is still at the mercy of the powers that be, the sanctioning bodies and the local commission.
It's not a slam dunk. Her hair follicle test and all that research, those results, they're still subject to review.
And we'll talk more about that in another video. As it pertains to the upcoming heavyweight contest between Daniel Dubois and Jarrell Miller, Eddie Hearn said if Daniel Dubois loses to Jarrell Miller, his career might be over.
These really are less than ideal circumstances for Daniel Dubois to take on a fight like this when he's coming right off a loss to Alexander Usyk.
A naturally smaller man, whereas Jarrell Miller, he's a big heavyweight and also packs a big punch, which makes their contest very intriguing. If Miller's chin is able to hold up, he might wear Dubois down as the fight plays out, says Hearn. I think it's a very tough fight. I mean, if Jarrell Miller's got a good chin, it's a very tough fight for Daniel Dubois because I feel like Jarrell puts a lot of pressure on. He's got a good engine. I think he'll try and wear Dubois down, but he's going to have to come through some heavy artillery on the way in, Hearn told Boxing Social.
We'll remember that 2 fights ago, Kevin Lerena, a naturally smaller man, a cruiserweight really, he dropped Daniel, 3 times? Off of glancing blows, glancing punches. Alexander Usyk, yet another cruiserweight who moved up in weight. He knocked Daniel out.
Jarrell Miller is a lot bigger than those guys walking around at just north of 300 pounds. If he lands on Daniel, what happens? In my previous video, we talked about what might happen if Jarrell Miller wins. What happens if Daniel Dubois loses? Where does he go from there? I think if Dubois loses, his career might be over. I would have liked to see him brought back with a couple of wins because I think he's a really good fighter. Against Usyk, he did well. He didn't win many rounds, but the low blow controversy, etc. So we'll see. But I think it's a very tough fight for Dubois. And if he loses, he's not in a great position at all. I think if Daniel loses, he will become a gatekeeper, a journeyman, a step-up fight for guys like Moses Ituama or Frazier Clark.
He'll stay a domestic level guy because he can't make it at world level. Every time he tried to step up, he got beat. He got beat by Joe Joyce. He got beat by Usyk. If Jarrell Miller beats him,
he becomes a domestic level gatekeeper intended to be an acid test, a litmus test for guys like Fabio Wortley or Solomon Dakers.
A rebound fight for guys like David Adelaide. Forget about world title aspirations because he just ain't got the chops to do it if he goes in there and lets Jarrell Miller beat him.
When Frank Warren first signed this young fighter, it seems that he moved him too fast. He was too quick to put him in there with Joe Joyce, and admittedly, even I thought he was ready for it at the time, though hindsight being 2020 and given Daniel's young age, perhaps he could have moved him slower, developed him over time.
Because they had time. That kid was in his early 20s, whereas Joe was already a grown man when Frank signed him, an Olympian.
Perhaps it shouldn't have been his intention to match them against each other, perhaps not, because look at how they've fared. They're both coming off of losses now, Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois. When it comes to Daniel, I think what Frank wanted was a clone.
A carbon copy of Anthony Joshua, a Queensberry Promotions version of him not having Anthony Joshua's amateur pedigree.
For all the stick that guy gets, he knocked off quite a few top 10, divisional top 10 fighters, champions, unified 3 alphabet titles before he ever lost a fight. Daniel never even came close.
But there was a time when he was heralded as Frank Warren's answer to Eddie Hearns's Anthony Joshua. That's what Daniel Dubois was intended to be, though that's not how it worked out.
Now he's got Jarrell Miller in front of him when he's on the bounce. Psychologically, I don't know that this guy has the mental fortitude to deal with the pressure.
Deal with the pressure? You saw the press conference. He could barely deal with Jarrell Miller's trash talk.
There's no easy way to say that I don't like his chances. There isn't a polite way to say that I don't think Daniel has the intestinal fortitude to stand up to Jarrell Miller's pressure. And the more I think about the fight, the more I think Jarrell's gonna beat him.
There isn't a polite way to say that.
As it pertains to that same show, Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin and Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker on December 23rd will be shown live on DAZN pay-per-view worldwide, including the UK and USA, with some additional domestic broadcast partners also to be announced in due course, which is more or less what I was expecting. They're saying that Frank Warren is at the helm of promotion, but there are nuances in association with the show that there are 4, count them 4, matchroom fighters.
Very little presence from the Queensberry Promotions stable. There's really only one Queensberry Promotions fighter on the show, and that's Daniel Dubois.
Him aside, you have Dmitry Bivol, who fights under the Matchroom banner, Jai Opataya, who fights under the Matchroom banner, Anthony Joshua, who fights under the Matchroom banner, and Filip Hrgovic, who is co-promoted by both Wasserman and Matchroom.
For using so many of Matchroom and DAZN's fighters, and DAZN seemingly being the main distributor of the pay-per-view, one is left to wonder, what do they need with Frank?
The official word per His Excellency's official press release, Mr. Turki Al-Sheikh, in so many words he said, DAZN is a global leading sports streaming service with domestically strong presence in Italy, Spain, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Belgium, France, Portugal, Japan, Taiwan, Canada, the US, and the UK. Its wide range of content includes top-flight football from the world's most popular competitions, Bundesliga, English Premier League, J-League, La Liga, Series A, and UEFA Champions League, in addition to the biggest sports from around the world, Formula 1, NFL, NBA, MotoGP, and the UFC. DAZN is the only place for fans around the world to watch every NFL match outside of North America. DAZN is building the ultimate sports entertainment business where fans from across the globe can watch, read, bet, play, share, socialize, buy tickets, and merchandise. All in one place with one account, one wallet, and on one app. It seems that Mr. Turki Al-Sheikh is a lot more pro-DAZN than, say, Frank Warren has been in previous years.
The proof is in the pudding that nobody's watching this.
You go on dead zone, you don't get seen.
What did you call it instead of the zone?
It's called the dead zone.
The dead zone.
The dead zone.
You go on dead zone, you don't get seen.
was Frank Warren, Bob Arum, Leonard Ellerby, who liked to call DAZN Dead Zone. And since then, Showtime has ended up leaving the sport of boxing. ESPN is experiencing a downward trend in terms of subscribers, and we'll talk about that in another video. And Frank Warren, for being at the helm of promotion, look at how many Matchroom fighters are on this show. Look at who's distributing the pay-per-view, DAZN.
Look at how the people in Saudi, look at how Mr. Turki Al-Sheikh references DAZN and the scope, the lens he views the platform in, and everything they're doing in sports, not limited to boxing.
And look at the price point of the show for US and Canadian fans who want to take in this pay-per-view. It's only $40. Only $40.
That's a lot less than people had to pay to watch Tyson Fury go out there and embarrass himself against a novice boxer.
$40. $40 in America. That's literally half of what you had to pay for Fury versus Ngannou. Fury versus Ngannou, the price point was $80 if you're already subscribed to ESPN Plus, and $90 if you're not. This show, which is a better show by and large, costs half of what that costed.
And don't forget that show bombed. This one I think is going to do a lot better on the premise that not only is it a better card overall, but it's more affordable. You'd sooner get $40 from a lot of people than $80.
Over a large area, and the North American continent that includes the United States and Canada. That's a large area that DAZN just so happens to cater to. It's not by accident the distributor of this show is DAZN. I've been telling you for ages now, DAZN covers a wider area than just ESPN. ESPN may be big in America, but outside of it,
TNT may be big in the UK, but outside of it, it's a domestic network.
And I'd say the same thing about Showtime, but after this year, Showtime is bowing out of boxing, so they're out of the race. They are out of the game. Now, I've had quite a few I told you so moments this entire calendar year, and this is just another. That DAZN is a global streaming app that reaches more people and more wallets than any of these established networks.
And while they are established, they're not global streaming platforms.
Upon DAZN debuting in the American market, so many American content creators were quite dismissive of DAZN's potential. Many content creators who don't even make boxing content anymore. I guess it shows what they know or what they knew, what they thought they knew, but that's customary here in America. A lot of guys talking a lot of stuff about a lot of things they know nothing about.
Is this who you get your information from?
It's a lot of people. They get settled into a certain way of thinking they know what they're talking about when they don't know the ball from the bounce.
Can't see the forest through the trees, though. Overall, it's what I've been telling you all along. Streaming apps are the future, and you don't need to be Albert Einstein to know that. That's where we are.
If you've been following this channel long enough, you will have heard me say that already about 1,000,000 times. This is 1,000,001.